Hey, it's Tom from Tom's Toons. Behind me is a year 2000 Bennington. It's about an 18 or 19 foot boat, 8 foot wide. We're gonna take you through the process on this boat of tearing things down. There's be a few parts along the way and some of the tips and tricks and pointers that we can give you for a tear down like this. Again, we're gonna take it down all the way to the pontoons, to bare aluminum, new plywood, new vinyl flooring. But this video is gonna focus on the actual tear down process and how we get these things apart to be ready to put them back together. Every project starts with us unhooking the captain's helm first, the steering console. Everything that's related to the motor and the electrical accessories is unhooked so the console can come right out of the boat. From there, we move to unhooking the seats, unhooking any of the wiring for speakers or lights with the seats. We can slide those to the middle of the boat. Then we work our way to the railings. We're unbolting the railings, remove those. Then we can get to our other electrical accessories like our navigation lights, our Bimini top, all of that lighting. Remember, quick tip, when you're unhooking things like this to put back on the boat later, when you cut the wire down here or unhook it, make sure that you leave plenty of slack to splice that back together. After the railings and the accessories and lighting are off, then we can remove our deck trim. Then we can get to tearing up the carpet and then the deck boards. A quick tip for your carpet removal: if you're tearing the whole thing off, cut it into about 12-inch strips and then you can peel the whole carpet, or find every cross member and you can cut strips widthwise and tear up just where the cross members are so you can find and remove the hardware easier that way. After the boards are off, you've got a clean slate ready to rebuild your pontoon with a new deck and vinyl, maybe new everything. First step of tearing down the boat is getting our console unhooked. That means steering, shift throttle control, ignition, removing these items that are gonna allow me to lift the console right off the boat, to pull wires down through the deck and get this out of the way. I always start with the control box, the shift and throttle. We've got different videos on covering a lot of different models of shift throttle in depth. We'll pull this cover off, we'll remove the cables. There's gonna be an electrical hookup for your neutral safety switch and your trim and tilt wires. When I get that out, I'll go ahead and go underneath, and some of the newer motors are plug and play. You can unhook all of your ignition, you can unhook your safety lanyard, it's down here. We can unhook all of that and that can stay in the dash. On this little bit older model, we're gonna have to remove the key switch, pull all of that out as a harness. My gauges are typically gonna be plugged into a gauge harness, so I can just remove that. Anything you unhook, label if you're unsure, even if it's just labeling it with A on one end and A on the other end that you disconnected. So when you come back to putting this back together, we can just plug those A wires back in, B wires, C wires, and so on, and everything will hook right back up how it was and will continue to work. Your stereo is typically gonna have its own plug that's power and speakers. Quick unhook that. You can drop that down as well, get that out of the way. And then our steering is gonna be its own mechanism. We'll remove the steering wheel. We'll remove that actual rotary helm. In this case, it's a quick connect rotary helm. And then after that, I'll be ready to lift the console right up. All the wires will fall out the bottom and I can pull this whole console off the boat. Some consoles have access. I have a panel down here or a door. Others, the only way to access some of this stuff sometimes is either remove the whole top half or remove your gauge panel, which is gonna give you a big opening to get access in behind. This is step one of the teardown process. Get this out of the way. It's kind of the one that scares a lot of people. Take your time, label everything as you take it apart, and then when it goes back together, you'll be all set for success. So step two, I'm getting the console finished up, about to come off right now. Marty is gonna help out by unbolting or unscrewing. It's typically just a big heavy duty stainless steel screw or 4 of them in each seat. That's what's gonna hold those down. So he's gonna go ahead and get those out. Your captain's chair or helm chair is typically through bolted. That's gotta come out. Then we'll have access at these railings. Every railing is a little different. But let's look at these railings and show you why we gotta get the furniture out first. On this railing, there's no hardware exposed on the outside at the bottom here. So we have to get at the hardware on the inside. As you can see down here, that's our Phillips number 3 head bolt right there, machine screw. That's gotta come out from the inside. So it's a 2-person job. Somebody with a wrench on the outside, somebody with an impact or screwdriver on the inside. Phase 2, get the seats out of the way, push them to the middle of the boat so we have room to loosen up the railings and remove them. The console is off, and as you can see, I labeled a couple plugs. I could have just looked at the color wires and no, this is a B. There's a B on the console side for that plug. These wires, just an auxiliary power. We cut that, labeled that. We'll heat shrink butt splice that back in. And then we've got our main power plug, labeled that. So that way when I get underneath there, there's no guessing or having to look. I just match my letters up and we go. Shift throttle cables are out over here, as well as that ignition harness, horn, all of that stuff that will hook back in. It's all color coded, so that stuff goes in pretty easy, but the ignition switch itself will have to push back through the dash and be reinstalled. So we'll just drop all of this stuff out the side of the pontoon when we're ready, once we get the railings off. I typically will actually cut a slit in the wood right here so we can drape everything out and over the side. Makes it a lot easier for removing the deck boards. We're almost ready with the furniture out to get to the railings. So this front corner panel is off of the railings. This seat, we'll remove that, get this one off. Then we can start working on the back. A lot of times this back piece, it might actually come off as one whole section of railing. Sometimes you can remove the middle part of the sun deck and make it come apart as 2 or even 3 pieces. This gives you a pretty good idea of what the carpet used to look like a long time ago before it started getting mildewy and falling apart on us. This gas tank is a portable, so this is on a smaller lake. It's got a 25 horse 4-stroke on it. They probably only go through a couple tanks a year on the portable. So this is a pretty simple uninstallation. A lot of older boats, you're gonna have this. Just unhook our fuel line, get the tank out of there. A big part of our railing removal usually is getting this fuel system out if it was a permanent mount tank, much like that one down there, which is gonna usually, all we have to do is unhook our fill spout and vent from the railing. There's gonna usually be a wire that grounds the sending unit, and then you might have to cut or unhook your fuel sending wires too, a pink and a black. But we're gonna usually have to undo that, get the fuel line either cut or detached from the permanent tank, then we can remove the railings. In this case, we get it a little bit easier today. That doesn't seem to happen very often. What we're gonna do is remove this whole back U-shaped railing, because there's 3 of us working on it. We're gonna remove it all as one piece, and then we'll reinstall it as one piece too. It's gonna make it a lot easier than having to mess with all the cushions and everything. Highly recommend. Do things like that if you have the space and the manpower or woman power. In the moment, it's gonna make your life easier for the whole project. Here's something that might save you some time when you get back to reassembly. This is in good shape, this corner cap. A lot of times you'll see docking light in the front here. We've got our navigation light. We're gonna reuse it. It's in good enough shape. When I pull this off, you're gonna see, gotta pull the wiring here. It was a quick connect, so that stays all together basically. When I remove this, I'm left with a really clear mark where this was on the railing. What I'm gonna do when I reinstall it, I'm gonna wait to clean this underneath until I get this back where I want it, holes drilled in the new deck, for my bolts, for the wires, and for the back bolt. Then I'll take a wet rag, soapy rag, clean this up. Then I can drop it right back on and have it right back where it used to be. Something, when you get the railings off, there's 2 types of deck trim. It's either going to come all the way into the boat to where the railings bolt through, or it's going to be short and it's going to sit outside of where the railings bolt through. That's the 2 ways it's typically going to go. This style to work with on a Bennington like this, there's a lot of brands who do this with a taller lip or wider lip on top, and our bolts run through for the railings. I'm gonna make sure that when I put this boat back together, I trace this front board as perfectly as possible so that these line up right where they need to be. Then I will make sure my corner caps line right up. When I get the new floor on, the deck trim goes back on first. Then I can run around with a drill all my holes for the railing, line them up, and drop them on. This makes life a lot simpler, a little bit easier too, to have this style of deck trim, because there's no guessing where the railings go. They're gonna line right back up with how they used to be, as long as you cut your back and front boards exactly the same as how they came from the factory. We're reusing all of the electrical on this boat, so we're gonna keep it intact. That will plug right back into the navigation light. We've got to remove it from the underside of the deck all the way, and then we can move on to tearing up the carpet. So some boats, most boats that we encounter have glue. That's how the carpet's held down. That's the proper way to do it, but there are brands that use a heavier carpet with a heavier backing, and there is no glue. JC Pontoons is one of those companies. As we peel this though, if we get spots that are real sticky, the best way we can approach it, I mentioned before, if you want to take all the carpet off, we can cut strips about 12 to 16 inches wide and rip the whole thing back, the whole length of the boat. Or we find seams or cross members like so, and we can cut strips widthwise, just 3 or 4 inches wide, the width of the boat, pull that up, and that's going to leave the hardware exposed where we can get at it. This actually is held on by deck bolts. So this is a elevator bolt, a lot of people call it. It's a flat top, almost like a carriage bolt. And then there is a nut underneath. In this case, it's a locking type nut. So we'll go around once we get the carpet up. Actually, before we get the carpet up, with this style, we can try to loosen all of these and hope for the best that they come off. Some will seize up, some the head will turn, and we'll have to go on the top side and either hold on to the top or cut it some way, shape, or form, or drill a hole saw around it so we can lift the boards off. So in this case, the carpet might not have to come up. We might be able to take the nuts off of these bolts, the deck bolts, the whole way through, and then we can flip the board back and just cut the carpet at the seams. Let's hope for the best. If it's a self-tapper, you're gonna have to get at the head of the self-tapper, usually by cutting that carpet or peeling it back. One of the quick tips that we use on almost every boat, because we always redeck. We never put vinyl on old wood. It's just asking for trouble with adhesion and longevity. We're putting new wood on this with new vinyl. I'm gonna cut a slit about 2 to 3 inches out right here so we can just pull all this wiring, drop it off the side of the boat, and continue on rather than having to work the sheet around it. So I just use a Sawzall. I'm really careful to make sure there's nothing underneath here for me to cut, and I make my cut. Now my wiring for the console can fall right down the side. When I put this back together, I'm gonna cut a hole underneath and feed everything back up. I will never cut this slit and then lay vinyl over top of it or set the console back on. I've seen people, they pull the whole console off the side of the boat through a slit like this. We're not gonna do that. This is just to make the whole teardown go a little bit faster, a little bit easier. I got all of the hardware to come right off. That's not a common occurrence. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna start in the front, and we're just gonna flip a board back, cut the carpet at the seam, and then keep working our way back on the boards. We just stack them, they go to the dump. It's the way it is. The front and the back board, we're gonna save, and we're gonna use those as stencils to cut out the new front and back deck boards. Let's get to work on that. So we're gonna flip this board back. If you come around the front side, that exposes the carpet. So usually one of us from each side will take a sharp razor, run it down the carpet. And this piece will get saved. We're gonna use this to stencil or template out a new board for the very front, because that's how our rub rail fits around. Those are the steps that we take to go through for a complete teardown of a pontoon boat. We're now down to the bare bones. If we had tar tape, that tar strip or butyl tape or silicone along our seams. We would take a torch to the bottom side, heat that, and scrape it with a scraper of sorts, paint scraper, and then that'll be cleaned off. When we're ready to put this back together, we'll put tar tape back on, we'll run our boards back on, new vinyl, boat comes back together. It's gonna look and feel like a brand new boat. Hope these tips were helpful for your teardown, for getting that first part of the project out of the way. It's the laborsome part, it's the dirty part, covered in everything, but now bringing it back together, that's the fun part. Thanks for watching.